This is the That You May Know Him podcast, illuminating biblical truth, applying it to faith, life, and culture. I am your host, Jesse Dunn, and I'm joined by my co-host, Blake Barbera. Blake, how you doing today, man?
Doing well, bro. It's been, I think, almost a month since we've done an episode. We've never just fallen off the map 3 weeks in a row before without telling people we're taking an intentional break. So I'm excited to share all that's gone on in life over the last 3 weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. And to our listeners out there, apologies for falling off the map for a little bit, but we have some stuff to share today that hopefully is going to be encouraging and a blessing to hear. Before we go into that, just want to remind our listeners, if you've found these videos and our ministry helpful in any way, please remember to give the video a like and share with some friends and loved ones. Remember, if you haven't already, please make sure you subscribe to the That You May Know Him channel here on YouTube. Doing that just helps get the word out so that other people like you can know and love Jesus like never before. So, Blake, talk to me a little bit. What's been going on the past couple weeks? Tell me a little bit about what's taken place with you and your family.
Yeah. So for those of you that don't know, my wife is Jesse's sister. Jesse being the person who I'm talking to right now, the co-host of this podcast. Jesse and I have been the best of friends since we met when I think were we 20 when we met, or 19?
Yeah.
We met at a teen/young adult Christian camp years ago, and we became best friends before I ended up marrying his sister. I did end up marrying his sister several years later, but this affects Jesse too, because we're part of the same family. The reason that we haven't had a podcast in the last 3 weeks is because my wife and I have been in a season of basically medical emergencies and health issues that we've never experienced before, and that came on very, very suddenly. Both of us have had issues, but what happened 2.5 weeks ago is my wife had a medical crisis that happened very quickly. That came on very quickly, and we've been dealing with that and recovering from that. God miraculously spared her life because it was that serious of a situation. He did so through not only sustaining her through some incredibly powerful and excruciating physical pain, but also through a group of doctors that he worked through to save her life. And so I'm really thankful, incredibly thankful for that, and thankful for the way that God gave her and us peace through all of it, and preserved our lives, and also our ability to have children, which I'll tell y'all about as we get into it.
Wow. Yeah, that's a good summary. I think that sums it up pretty well. Maybe we could elaborate a little bit and go into what, if you don't mind sharing, what exactly happened and took place. How did this all begin?
Yeah. So some people have actually asked my wife to record her testimony, and she basically said to me the other day, hey, if you guys are going to do a podcast on this, which I would like to share our story, I'm going to let that serve as my testimony, because she said to me, you remember everything way better than I do. It was basically a fog for me. So I'm speaking sort of on behalf of my family, but also trying my best to faithfully share my wife's testimony. I mean, it's our testimony, but it's also her testimony. Summer was going along quite well. We've been doing the podcast. We were in the middle of what was going to be a 2+ part series on tithing and cheerful giving. The last episode we did before this, we actually took a break from that because Jesse was sick for a few days and couldn't join me. And I didn't want to do the episode we had planned on giving and tithing without him. He put a lot of the work into preparing that episode, the majority of the work into preparing that episode. It was a Tuesday. I was in the middle of also teaching a class at Capital Seminary, one of the summer classes. I have class on Tuesday nights with students, so that's when I normally have a Zoom meeting with them. But Tuesday morning, my wife, after breakfast, starts telling me about this stomach pain that she's having. She's like, this is so weird. Like, my stomach's just really starting to hurt. I'm like, I don't know what that is, but we prayed like we do whenever there's something going on like that. And I just was like, hey, take it easy and keep me posted. Well, she went and got ready and then got out of the shower and was like, looked at me basically. I had my door open because I knew my office door. I knew she wasn't feeling well. I can see into our bedroom from this studio if the door's open. She just gives me this look like something's not right. I say to her, hey, do we need to go take you somewhere? My wife is very, she can be stubborn when it comes to going to get medical help. Her response is always, God's got me, which that's going to come up again in this story. She's like, no, I'm fine, but I'm just hoping this goes away. I don't know if this is really bad cramping or what. So, okay. She had made plans with y'all's mom that day to get together. She let her mom know, hey, I'm not feeling well. I'm not going to be able to come out there. And as your mom is, classic, loving, concerned Hungarian mom, she's like, well, I'm going to be in the area. I'm going to bring you guys some soup. So my mother-in-law, Jesse's mom, shows up. I don't even know how these grandmas do it. Like an hour later, it seemed like, she finds out her daughter's not feeling well. She lives 45 minutes away. An hour later, she's at our house with soup. And she's dropping it off, and Christina opens the door to meet her. And Christina, my wife, is like, man, I feel like I'm going to pass out. And your mom's like, that's weird. So Christina tells me, was just talking to my mom and I felt like I was about to literally pass out. I was like, honey, you need to sit down and take a break. So she sits down. We give our son, I give our son lunch, put him down for his nap. And I tell her, look, I'm going to take a break for a minute and just sit with you and see how you're doing. I force my wife to sit down during my son's nap, which she does not usually do. And so she just sits for a couple hours on the couch and is trying to see what's going on and evaluate. And I eventually go back to work. And a couple hours later, this is like mid-afternoon at this point, my son wakes up. I hear him, just about to go check and see how my wife's doing. She opens the office door and she has tears in her eyes. And she's like, my stomach is killing me. And I just stood up and I swear I was about to pass out again. I felt like I was about to black out if I didn't grab on to something. So I'm like, okay, listen, honey, we need to go somewhere and get you looked at. She's like, no, I just need to lay down. So I say, okay, lay down. I'll get Luca up from his nap. We'll come check on you in just a bit. So that's what happens. I get my son up from his nap. My wife lays down. We play and read books for maybe 30 minutes. And I say to Luca, we need to go check on mama. We come back to check on mama and she's in bed, but as she turns over, she's got tears in her eyes and she's in obvious physical pain. Her stomach really hurts at this point. So at this point, I go into full-blown husband mode. Honey, we're going to urgent care. We need to get you up. I'm about to help her up, but as I turn to put my son down and she starts to get up out of bed, bro, I've never seen anything like this in my life. All the color leaves her body in a split second. She turns completely pale white and completely passes out, goes unresponsive. I've never seen the color drain out of a person like that before. If I didn't have this sort of like instinct kick in where I just kind of immediately kicked into gear, I mean, looking back, I'm like, how was I not terrified when I saw this? because my wife turns sheet white. She passes out. The only thing that stopped her from falling and hitting her head was me seeing it and grabbing her. And thankfully I had just put our son down and sort of setting her down, but she's completely unresponsive. So I start talking to her loudly, saying, honey, wake up. Honey, stay with me. Hello. And I run out, grab my phone, and call 911. Somehow, I really believe this was the Holy Spirit. Our son, who is a very excitable, almost 2-year-old boy, just became calm and sat down right next to his mom, who was propped up next to the bed, and just sort of put his head on her and just said, mama, and just wasn't concerned, but just was sitting there next to her. Am I going to, is this followable at this point, Jesse?
Yeah. Keep it up.
All right. I get 911 on the phone, and I'm sort of talking / yelling, not yelling in a bad way, but like speaking very loudly to my wife. Honey, wake up, stay with me. I'm here. Do you hear me? And I'm telling the 911 operator, my wife is unresponsive and passed out and just fell. They're running me through the protocols. Did she hit her head? No, I caught her, thankfully. Okay. Seems like a full-blown minute went by. I think it was probably more like 30 seconds. It felt like 30 minutes. Felt like a minute. Felt like the longest minute of my life. My wife opens her eyes and comes to. And I see the color starting to come back, but she's still extremely pale. She's like, what happened? I said, you just passed out completely, turned white as a ghost. She's like, I did? I'm like, yeah. At this point, the ambulance is on the way. I don't know how, a few minutes later, fire department shows up with their, fire truck with medics on it, with EMTs. They're in here doing tests on her quickly. The ambulance guys show up. Her blood pressure is extremely low, is what they say. And the head guy, who seemed to be in charge of the whole situation, said to me, brother, that's what's going on. I don't know what's causing her blood pressure to be this low, but it's low enough to where if it were my wife, she would not be going to the hospital in my car. She'd be going in the ambulance. I want you to know that. I really appreciated him saying that. They said, look, let's get her stable and try to stand her up and see what happens. They did that. As she tried to stand up, her blood pressure dropped even further immediately. So they said, look, something is causing her blood pressure to just be extremely low. Okay. I call my mother-in-law. I say, can you come watch Luca? They load her up into the ambulance. They asked me, where do we take her? We have different insurance than we had last year. So I've never been to any of the hospitals that I know are covered on our plan. I just say, take her to UNC. They're like, yeah, that's a good call. That's where we'd be going. UNC is University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. It's like 20 minutes from our house. My wife takes off. My mother-in-law gets here about 30 minutes later. She was still in the area. I load up a bag and I head to the hospital. When I get there, the ER is packed to the gills, full of people. And I find my wife sitting in a wheelchair, pretty dazed, pretty pale, pretty out of it, in the middle of just a sea of people. And at that point, in my younger years, in previous days, I probably would have gotten really upset. And there were times over the next couple hours where I thought, I need to make a scene. I need to get her attention. She's in really bad physical pain, but she's seated in a wheelchair. So she's seated up, and she says to me, this is the only thing that's bearable. I don't want to stand up, and I don't want to try and lean back because it hurts so bad when I do that. So I go, okay, well, you're comfortable and you're stable. She's lightheaded at this point, but we just decide to pray. So I'm just with her, holding her hand, trying to keep her comfortable. And we're just praying that we get seen soon. And eventually we get taken back. Her vitals get taken. Then we get brought back to the waiting room. I see other people are really starting to get upset. There's people that are yelling at nurses, and everyone's just doing the best they can, but it's a crazy situation. after like maybe 3 hours, I want to say, our name gets called and we're like, oh, wow. Thank God. At this point, it's probably like 7:30 or 8 o'clock at night. We get taken back to a room and my wife has to get out of the wheelchair and get up onto a hospital bed. And at this point, her pain level is like at a 10 plus. It's excruciatingly painful for her to move. Her abdomen is just screaming at her. We get her propped up on the bed and seated on the edge of the bed. And she's like, I need to stay right here. And so she's sitting on the edge of a hospital bed and she's leaning. I'm just standing next to her. She's leaning against my chest. A really nice young doctor. I forget his name, but he was a young Latin doctor, really caring, really compassionate guy, comes in and says, hey, I know you're having stomach pain. I know your blood pressure is really low. We need to figure out what's going on with you. And she says, we say, oh, okay, great. He says, I have to ask you, is it possible that you're pregnant? And we didn't expect that. We said, oh yeah, it's possible. We didn't expect it because we track, to put it, not get too graphic, we're trying to have another kid. So my wife keeps pretty close track of her cycle, and it hadn't been that long since her last cycle had ended. We were actually at the point that day where she was like in a high ovulation period, and we were thinking, okay, this would be a time to try and conceive that day or like the next day. We didn't think she could be pregnant because her period had ended, I think like 7 days before that, maybe. Anyway, we say, no, we didn't expect that, but it's definitely possible. He says, okay, I need to get you leaned back so we can do a quick ultrasound. We try to lean her back, and bro, she is screaming in pain. I mean, screaming. She's like, I cannot do this. This hurts worse than anything I've ever felt in my life. The doctor says, okay, I need to give you some morphine because I got to get you back, leaned back so I can do some tests, or I can do this ultrasound. He gives her morphine. He tells us to wait a few minutes. I'm again just standing next to her bed. She's just sitting there, kind of leaning against my chest. After maybe like 40 minutes of that, including the doctor coming and trying to lean back, she says, honey, sit down because I'm fine. I can just sit here. Right when I sit down, I pull up a chair in front of her. I look up at her. She says, whew, I feel like I'm going to pass out. I said, really? I kind of look down, look back up, and she just goes straight back. Like it just like that. Passes out, unresponsive again. I quickly stand up and try to get my arms under her, and I start yelling for help because she's unresponsive. I'm saying, honey, hello. And she's not answering. So I start hollering, I need help in here. Excuse me. I'm like, hey, my wife's unresponsive. I need help. And a nurse at that point runs in and says, okay, please get under her left arm. I'll get under her right arm. We go to lift her. My wife's not a big person, but it's like when someone's kind of like weirdly sprawled across a hospital bed, it's hard to get them propped up if you don't know what you're doing. The other side of this story is I hadn't been feeling well for a few weeks at this point and probably wasn't at my physical strongest. I had stopped exercising a few weeks before this because I had some physical stuff going on, which I can talk about at the end. As we're lifting my wife up, she comes to, and bro, she is screaming in pain. Like I've never seen this type of pain before, where she is just, it's like she's just screaming how bad this hurts. We take the opportunity to like lay her up propped up on the bed. The doctor rushes in. He's like, I'm going to give you more morphine because I have to get you a little more vertical. I have to figure out what's going on with you. And this is getting like pretty serious. I can tell this is serious. So we got to figure this out. He gives her more morphine. They put her back a little bit. It's really painful for her, but they get her to the point where they can start doing this ultrasound. They have basically a transportable little mini ultrasound machine. The doctor starts this ultrasound and he can't see anything except that she has tons of fluid in her stomach. He's like, all I can see is that you have fluid all over your stomach. And at this point, bro, my wife's stomach is starting to like expand. It looks like she's pregnant. And within like an hour, it looked like she was like as pregnant as she ever looked when she was pregnant with our son. Actually, my wife didn't, when my wife had our son, she didn't look super pregnant. She actually, had a pretty small bump compared to most people. Our son was really small, and there's all sorts of reasons for that I'm not going to get into. But people used to say to her, wow, you barely look like you're pregnant, because she carried it really well. At this point, she looked like she was at that point or maybe slightly more. When he sees the fluid on her stomach, things now at this point start moving quickly. Another doctor is in there. They start talking to us about what's called an ectopic pregnancy, which is when you're pregnant, but the pregnancy does not make its way into the uterus where it's supposed to land. It stops short of that, usually in a fallopian tube. This is extremely dangerous. In centuries and in times past, this almost always killed women because an ectopic pregnancy gets stuck in a fallopian tube, and eventually, as it grows, it bursts the fallopian tube, which at that point, from what I understand, that's usually a fatal thing. That's intense, rapid internal bleeding. They usually bleed on their own before that point, ectopic pregnancies, which is what they now thought pretty confidently was going on with my wife. You have this internal bleeding. It's very painful. It's very serious. We can see the fluid, but we don't know for sure. But we have to get in there and find this and figure it out and fix it now, because at this point, they're thinking, your life's on the line if we don't act soon. So now, all of a sudden, things are happening. The next thing I know, we've talked to our doctor's supervisor who tells us what they think's going on. The next thing I know, there's a very stately looking, older blonde woman standing in front of me who may be in her mid-60s, named Dr. Quackenbush. I'm pretty sure that was her name. I hope I'm not butchering it, but she very much looks like she's in charge of this entire ER, and she acts like it too. She was very, very calm, very refined. She walked into the room with the other two doctors and said, "Darling, we think you're having an ectopic pregnancy. We need to get you over to the other side of the emergency room, and we need to get you into surgery now because this is a serious situation. We don't know for sure. We think this is what's going on, but whatever's going on, we need to get in there and fix it." They're telling us about this. And before I know it, we're moving to the other side of the emergency room. And so we're getting transported. Dr. Quackenbush tells us when we get over there, there's going to be a lot of people. There's going to be a lot of doctors attending to you. We're going to be prepping a surgery room, and this is all going to happen pretty quickly. She explains to us again what an ectopic pregnancy is and how they deal with it. And she says what the previous doctor had said, which was, if we find an ectopic pregnancy, oftentimes we can remove it without having to take any of your organs or reproductive parts out of your body. But oftentimes, if it's in a fallopian tube, we can't remove it without taking out a fallopian tube. That was the only moment where my wife showed some real emotion other than pain, because that was a scary thought. The thought that she would potentially be losing reproductive organs. And I just remember her grabbing my hand and looking at me. This is the only moment that she cried the entire time. The amount of pain she was in, she was so strong this entire time. And God gave her and us such a peace. But that was the moment she grabbed my hand and said, I really want to have a daughter. And And she had never said that to me in that way before. And I didn't, I didn't even think about the response. I didn't have time to like theologically analyze it and ask myself, is this a word from the Lord or not? I just put my hand on hers and I said, honey, you will. We will. We're going to have a daughter. It's going to happen. Don't worry about that. And the amazing thing, bro, is this entire time we were praying. I was talking to her. We were just speaking to each other. And the only thing that she kept saying to me was, I know God's got this. I know God's got me. I have peace. She kept saying that. I have peace. I know God's got me. This just hurts like hell. That's what she was saying. This hurts like hell. It hurts so bad, but I know God's got me. And it was so encouraging to me because, I mean, my wife has this level of strength in crisis situations that I don't feel like I have at all. I feel like I was praying for her to have peace, but I probably should have been praying for myself to have peace because she was more at peace than I was, despite being in this insane amount of pain. And that's all she could say to me was, I know God's got me. And so basically our prayers were just, a lot of our prayers throughout this whole process were, thank you for the peace that you're giving us, God. Thank you for the shalom. Thank you for the fact that you seem to be like invigorating us with this supernatural trust and peace, because this is a crazy situation. We just got told they might have to take out some of my wife's reproductive organs to save her life, but we're not freaking out at all. Anyway, we doing okay, Jesse? I know I'm talking a lot here. I mean, I'm sharing the story, but just want to check in.
Yeah. For the sake of time, maybe we could
speed it up.
Some of the details we might be able to.
Yeah. Well, it all goes pretty quick from here. We get taken over to the other side of the ER. There's like 4 doctors waiting for us in the room that we get put into, and a nurse. And they're like, they just start going to town, hooking her up, telling us about ectopic pregnancies, telling us what's about to happen, telling us that there's a surgeon that's about to show up who's going to be the one doing the procedure. At this point, Dr. 𝗧𝗏𝗄𝐿, she had started to walk over with us, but then got called to something else. She walks back up, looks at this team of doctors. Most of them were young women. One of them asks, one of them was trying to get a bigger ultrasound machine. She said, I really want to try and see what's going on before we take you into surgery if we can. She's asking for a bigger ultrasound machine. And the head of the ER, Dr. 𝗧𝗏𝗄𝐿, walks up, and this doctor says, Dr. 𝗧𝗏𝗄𝐿, can I order a full ultrasound before we take her into surgery to try and see if I can see anything? And the doctor, who's the head of the ER, looks at her and says, no, you can't. And just walks away. Like, it's basically shutting things down, which I took that to be, I don't know. I took that to be, God, I'm thankful that you've put somebody over this situation right now who seems to have authority and be very confident in their decisions and in their actions. When you get in situations like this in the hospital, it's like, we know we trust God and we know that he's over everything, but you also pray that, the people you have to submit to in this moment are people that are solid and stable, hopefully people that are walking with God. But at this point, it's like, okay, this situation's sort of out of my hands. I can seek the Lord and pray, but I've got to trust. I've got to trust the people that God's put in place here. So the next thing we know, there's a young doctor standing in front of us named Dr. Rittenhouse. She looks like she's my age or younger, bro. I mean, to be honest, she looks younger, but she doesn't act young at all. She walks in and she's the one that's going to be doing this surgery. She repeats the entire spiel about ectopic pregnancies and says, look, I'm going to be honest. I'm the one that does these surgeries. A lot of times it's impossible to get an ectopic pregnancy out of one of your fallopian tubes without taking the tube out. This is the one thing we're concerned about. And we just, between my wife and I, we try to reiterate to them, her life is obviously the most important thing to us, but also keeping her intact is important to us. And so we just want to ask you, please don't take anything out of her body that you don't absolutely have to save her life. And they respect that and they honor that. And that's good. So we're getting ready for surgery. We're getting taken back. Suddenly they're like, okay, we're ready to go. My wife and I have just been consistently, every free moment we had, we're praying, we're communicating. I'm telling her, God's got you. She's telling me, God's got this. I know he does. I really want to keep my body intact. But I have peace. As we're going up to the surgery room, as we're just leaving this room that we've been in, bro, I can't tell you. I feel like God gives me this crystal clear picture in my mind. I mean, one of those rare moments in life, for me, it's rare that I get a crystal clear image in my head to the point where it's so clear and it's so sudden and it's so out of the blue. I know it's from God. I just have to believe it's from God. I see in my mind this picture of Jesus Christ standing elevated over an operating table and over a team of doctors, just standing over it, almost like he's an angelic force, but standing over it. And immediately in my mind, I think of the last passage in Matthew, beginning of Acts, where Jesus says to his disciples, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. All authority. And he says, so go and make disciples of all nations. And I just see this picture so clearly as we're wheeling down the hall, up the elevator, into the surgery wing. We get put in the prep area for surgery. And once we stop, I say to my wife, I said, honey, I just got this image. And Jesus Christ is going to be standing over your operating table. He will be. And he said, all authority in heaven and on earth is his. And she was like, wow, I believe it. I'm so glad you told me that. And bro, this image just was in my mind from this point on, all the way till she went back. And the whole time she was in surgery, I was just cleaving to this. So we're in this hospital wing in the surgery center it's actually, we're told we're in the post-op, but since there's nobody there besides us, they just did her pre-op in the post-op wing. There's 3 nurses in this area, and they're like, guys, the first thing they say is, this is crazy. This place is packed every night. And for some reason, there's nobody here except for you guys. And so this one nurse in particular is just basically sitting with us, talking, having, kind of trying to have jovial conversation, waiting. And she says something to me that everybody has said this entire time. I probably had 4 doctors say this to me. You did the right thing bringing her here. She's in good hands. You did the right thing. If you hadn't brought her, she probably wouldn't make this, but we're going to fix this. So she repeats that. And I'm thankful that people keep saying that to me. It's positive affirmation. We're getting ready for surgery. Her and I pray again. I tell her again, hey, Jesus Christ is going to be standing over your table. Don't worry. He's got you. The peace is just, it's like the rapidity of the situation is crazy, but the peace that we have is even more mind-blowing to me and tangible. And so all these doctors that were there show up. They're all ready to take her back. One of them again says to me, in front of Christina. You did the right thing. She's in good hands. And I finally just had this feeling come over me like, you know what? I just need to get this out. I said, I so appreciate you saying that, but I need you guys to know something. At this point, I hadn't talked to anyone, but I had been texting our whole family, right? You, your parents, my sister, people knew what was going on. And I had actually texted the names of some of these doctors who I knew were going to be operating on my wife to some family members. I said, I need you guys to know something. You are in great hands too, because we are a family that prays and believes God. And I have texted your names to many people who are praying for you right now by name. So I just want you to know you are in great hands also. And this is going to go so well. And one girl laughed, not in an insulting way, in like a happy way. Another girl said, thank you for that. The girl who I was sort of responding to was kind of like, whatever. But I just got it out. And at that moment, I realized that the woman who was performing the surgery, Dr. Rittenhouse, was standing there, and I couldn't really tell what look she had on her face, but she said, okay, let's go. At this point, it's 11:45 at night, and the doctor who was doing the surgery said, I should be out of this in an hour and a half. Okay. So my wife's in surgery. I have not even thought about water, food, coffee, anything at this point. The nurse takes me down to the cafeteria quickly. I grab a sandwich and a big cup of coffee, and she brings me back up and shows me where the waiting room is. And so I just sit there. At this point, it was so late that I didn't want to call anyone on the East Coast, because I thought, okay, people are either praying or asleep, and I'm not going to interrupt that. There's one friend who I know loves Christina and I a lot on the West Coast that I called, and I just said, listen, this is the situation. Will you pray with me? I'm not going to stay on the phone long, but will you pray with me? And then just keep us in your prayers. We talked for maybe 10 minutes. By 12:05, 12:10, I was off the phone. And all I did for the next 2.5 hours was walk back and forth up and down an empty hallway in a hospital wing, waiting to hear what was going to happen with my wife, not knowing if she was going to be able to have children again. I mean, not knowing if she was going to be even like make it through this. I felt confident she was, but all the options go through your head. But I had this image of the Lord standing over her. And so I took comfort in that. And at 2:30 in the morning, and dude, it was crazy because there was nobody there. I mean, it was like the place was empty. One of the only people I saw was a night janitor named Mr. Chuck, who I believe had the Holy Spirit. In fact, the thoughts crossed my mind that this guy might have been an angel who stopped and looked at me and said, I don't know what's going on with your family, but I'm praying that it all turns out well. Which is funny because my friend and I had prayed just before that for a good outcome. That's what we were praying for, a good outcome. And he said, it's crazy. This place is normally packed. It's 6 a.m. tomorrow. It's going to be a zoo. But there's nobody here tonight. He's like, I almost never see anything like this. I said, I don't know, man. But thanks for the encouragement. That's the only guy I talked to for 2.5 hours. And finally, I see at the end of the hallway, Dr. Rittenhouse. And she says, you're the person I'm looking for. And so she says, let's talk in the waiting room. Let's sit down. I'm like, okay. So I go back and grab my backpack. I'm trying to see what look she has on her face. And honestly, she looked bewildered. To me, I thought, I don't know how to read this. Those seconds where you see your wife's surgeon and she says to you, let's talk. But, you got to walk to the waiting room and find a seat. You're like kind of analyzing everything. We sit down and she says to me, well, I have good news on all fronts. She said, I did not have to take any part of your wife's body out. There was nothing that I removed, nothing I needed to remove. She said, I very quickly figured out what was causing your wife to have internal bleeding. And by the way, she had over 1 liter of blood sitting in her abdomen. And I'm surprised she wasn't completely passed out. She says, I can't imagine the level of pain that she would have been in because of that amount of fluid, but also blood is highly irritative. And when your organs are sitting in blood, it's excruciating. I said, wow, she was pregnant, bro. And she had basically a naturally forming cyst on her ovary that comes every time a woman has her cycle. This is how Dr. Rittenhouse explained it to me. And then falls away at the end of the cycle. But if a woman gets pregnant, that naturally forming cyst, which is called the corpus luteum, is the thing that starts generating a certain hormone that's found in women who are pregnant. It stays around for 12 weeks. That popped a leak, that cyst, and it was leaking blood in her abdomen all morning and all day and all night until they went in, cauterized this leaking cyst on her ovary, and sucked all the blood out of her abdomen with what looked like a little mini shot vac. Because I saw pictures of all this. And she said, the reason I took so long is because I looked everywhere for an ectopic pregnancy to make sure she wasn't having one, and I couldn't find one. So she said, I've only ever seen this one other time in my career. And that woman not only was okay, but she went on to have a viable pregnancy. She said, I'm hoping the same thing for you. I think you actually have a viable pregnancy, and I think your wife's going to make a full recovery, but we'll know more in a few days. And that was what she told me. So not only did my wife not have to lose any parts, they fixed the problem. She said, I have no reason to think this would ever happen again. But she also was hoping, and I was hoping, and we were hoping that my wife would still be pregnant. When I saw my wife, all we could do was rejoice at the fact that they had found the problem. They had fixed the problem. She was okay. She was tired, obviously. But they actually told us we could go home later that morning. They thought she would be safe to go home and just, I could care for her here, which we did. As it turns out, my wife did miscarry about a week later, and we had indications a few days later that would happen. But the amount of peace that God gave us through this process and the way that he covered us and covered her was so astounding, that all we could do was just, our hearts are full of thanksgiving, gratitude. We've been brought even closer together through this. When we found out we were probably going to miscarry, I remember looking at my wife and asking her how she was. And she's like, basically, what can we do but trust him? I mean, what can we do? How can we even, I mean, we were sad. It's heavy. It's a heavy thing to lose a conceived child, but our thoughts are basically, how can we do anything but trust him at this point? He's been so faithful and so good to deliver us through crazy circumstances. All we can do is trust. And we both, we feel so confident that we're going to be able to have another baby. And also, I have this new hope to look forward to, which is when I get to heaven, I'm not just going to get to meet the Lord, which I am most excited about of anything in life. I'll also get to meet another one of my kids, which I as sad as it is, I trust the Lord, and it makes my heart happy that I'm going to get to see that person one day in the future. The other thing is, looking back, we got this chance to witness even without saying that many words. I mean, the only thing I said explicitly to people, I did actually say a lot to the doctor afterward, because she said things like, there's reason to be hopeful, but I don't want to get your hopes up too much. I said to her, you know what? We love hope. We are people who thrive on hope. Hope is a huge part of our life, and we're not afraid of hope. She said, there will be risks involved when if this pregnancy is viable. I said, you know what? People told us that we were going to have risks and that things were going to be tricky the entire time my wife was pregnant with our son. And guess what? He's a happy, healthy 2-year-old boy who couldn't be doing better. So don't worry about scaring us or getting our hopes up or any of that. We are fully confident in the Lord and in what he's going to do in our lives and how he's going to preserve and protect us and our family. By the end of all that, I hope that the people and that doctor saw how great God is and how faithful he is to people who genuinely trust him. The last thing she said when she took me to my wife and I saw her and I kissed her and I told her everything, the doctor just looked at us and she just said, "That's beautiful," and walked away. And that was it. And the nurse later, before we left, said, I know that you guys have a lot of love for Jesus. She said, I want you to know I do too. She says, I don't always show it the same way, but I do too. And I was like, praise the Lord, sister. That's awesome. I wasn't trying to be a Jesus, wasn't trying to convert the whole hospital through all this, because there was a lot going on, but I guess just the peace of God over us is what enabled us to be a witness. So anyway, bro, that's what happened. And that's why, that's one of the reasons why we've been off for the last few weeks.
Wow. Thanks for sharing that, man. Appreciate you diving into that. It's pretty cool to see God's faithfulness and his goodness throughout the stuff that comes up in our lives. And I know that wasn't it, but I know it took a little bit just to share that piece of it. So
yeah,
thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, brother, you got it. There's more to the story. It's definitely felt like a season of there's more going on than just the physical in our minds. There's a spiritual element to all this. I'm not going to get into it, but I actually wound up in the same ER later that week. Wound up on a surgical table the following week. I've gotten some answers to what's been going on with me physically, and we're attacking it from every angle, medicinally, holistically, spiritually, most importantly. But all I can say is God keeps bringing up for us the lessons from the life of Job that I've learned, which is when you don't just run to being exclusively outcome driven. We believe in healing, Jesse. We believe in healing. We believe that God restores. But I don't want to be a person who's only outcome driven all the time, because when you are only outcome driven, you miss the opportunity to encounter God in the midst of these things that life throws at us.
Yeah.
And you're never going to convince me that going through difficult situations and even suffering does not create an opportunity for someone to know the love and the faithfulness of Christ more fully and more deeply, because it did for us. It does for us seemingly every time. And all I can say is it's only God who turns our hearts to him when these situations happen. Bro, we have been so deeply reminded about the love of God for us personally through this. There's been nights where I'm laying in bed going, Lord, like, you're reminding me of these these things you taught me when I was a young man, living in IB with you, roommates, I mean, we were broke as a joke, but we loved God and we wanted to serve him. We wanted to start a home church, and we did. I mean, we were doing the best we knew how to serve the Lord. There were nights we were hungry. There were mornings I couldn't even afford a cup of coffee, but God was teaching us about the depth of his love for us in this spiritually rich season. And he's been reminding me of those things to the point where now my wife's recovering and getting stronger every day. I have a lot of confidence that God's going to fully heal and redeem what I have going on. But I found myself in bed the other night saying, Lord, I don't want to miss what you have for me. If there's more that you need to teach me about your love, then I don't care if this takes longer. I don't want to miss what you have for me. I don't want to miss the chance to be so deeply affected and to encounter your love in a personal way. It's not to say you have to go through difficulties to experience it, but difficulty and suffering inevitably is what it does. God uses it to draw us closer to him. And so we're at the point where it seems like we're actually going up and we're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, but we're just cleaving to God, even in the midst of that, going, Lord, we know that you work all things together for the good of those that love you. And so teach us what you want us to know and don't let us miss anything. And yeah, that's where we're at. We don't want to be people who the devil can ever point to and say, see, God, the second you touch them, the second you afflict them, they don't trust you anymore. They don't think you're good anymore. We don't want to be people who only love God for outcomes and for circumstances. We want to be the type of people who always, no matter what, declare and testify to his goodness and his faithfulness. And so by his grace, it feels like that's what he's giving us the chance to do. And that's what we're trying to do.
Amen. That's awesome.
Yeah. Thanks for letting me share the testimony, Jess.
Absolutely. Well, to our listeners out there, thank you for taking the time to listen and hear what has been going on in Blake's life and the life of his family. As a quick reminder to our listeners, this podcast and other content produced by That You May Know Him Ministries is made possible by listeners like you. So thank you for your continued support. And we will be back next week. We in the middle of a series on biblical giving. What does giving look like for a Christian? We talked it's probably been at least a month now, but we talked last about what tithing looked like in the Old Testament. We promise to continue that talk track and look at what does biblical giving look like for Christians today. So we are going to continue that next week on the That You May Know Him podcast.
Yeah. Lord willing.
Lord willing.
I feel like we got to start saying Lord willing whenever we tell him what we're going to do next week.
Oh, all right. Well,
all right.
Thank you for listening to the That You May Know Him podcast. Stay blessed, live loved. Thanks for listening.
We'll talk to you next time.
If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe. Also, please consider giving us a 5-star review and telling your friends to subscribe as well. We're available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Also, don't forget to subscribe on YouTube and check out our website for tons of free, biblically based content like Bible studies, devotionals, articles, and Bible teachings. The That You May Know Him podcast is produced by That You May Know Him Ministries, Durham, North Carolina. You can visit our website at thatyoumayknowhim.com.